This is an event that we put together with the Headless Club, Commerce UI, Sanity, Vervaunt, and Nosto. We'd like to thank them for their partnership. We have quite a few people here, primarily from our agency partners, but also our tech partners, but also brands and clients that we work with. Thank you all for coming. We're going to start off with a very quick panel, and then we're going to move on to more drinks and more food. Well, actually, no, food. We've not had food yet. So we're going to start with the panel. I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves instead of me introducing them. So Liam, let's start with you.
Hello everyone, I'm Liam. I'm Technical Director of Vervaunt. We are an e-com consultancy, essentially, with also doing performance marketing. And we're platform agnostic, but we do a lot of work with Shopify. That's a rough intro.
I'm Ben Homer. I am a Senior Solution Engineer at Shopify, so I work with new business, typically in sort of 0 to 20 million kind of world, with Northern Europe and then sometimes Middle East and Africa as well.
Hi, I'm Micah from Commerce. All right, now it's better. Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Micah, co-founder and CTO at Commerce UI. So Commerce UI is a boutique agency focused on building e-commerce for fashion, beauty, and lifestyle brands.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So just to set it up, today we put together a group of people who are either operate in the space of headless commerce or are interested in it. So it's really this panel is just to start us off with a few discussion points, kind of frame the discussion, understand where Shopify comes in to it all, and then, this is going to be a free-flowing discussion once we finish off with the panel. So I'm going to start with a question for Michael, and I'm going to ask Michael to maybe frame actually the notion of headless commerce. Do you mind putting it for us in plain terms?
Yeah, sure thing. It's a bit of a tricky warm question since explaining headless in non-technical terms, it's quite difficult. It is a technical term with a lot of nuances, but at its core, headless commerce is about separating the user-facing side, the interface, the part of the e-commerce that the user interacts with, apart from the backend side of things, backend of the e-commerce platform. So by backend, I mean the place where all the data and the business logic is held. So in non-headless applications, like let's say Shopify Native or Shopify Liquid, everything is bundled together. So I don't know, inventory management, product display, the user interface is all bundled together, and it could be very efficient because everything has access to everything and direct access to everything. But on the other side of things, you have to conform to the limitations and the assumptions of the e-commerce platform. So when we separate the user interface from the e-commerce platforms, essentially what we do is we create another application from the scratch. So now one application is the e-commerce platform, the another one is the user interface. And since it's a separate application that we build from the scratch, it means that it has much more capabilities. We have freedom to choose the tech stack that we need. We can control routing, the URL structure. We can control how we obtain the data, how we merge the data from various resources. We can optimize performance to much greater extent. So right now, having those two applications, we have e-commerce platform, we have another headless application, which is the user interface. So all of the third-party integrations can communicate directly to this new application, which basically simplifies things and allow to integrate even more third parties, like, for example, headless CMS or maybe a search engine.
Sounds good. Liam, I have a question for you, which is how would you understand business agility in the context of e-commerce? And what would you say the most important features for e-commerce platform in the context of business agility?
Yeah, I think a lot of brands that come to us, I think there's probably two reasons why they move from, so we talked before this on, say, Magento and Salesforce, which historically, there's a lot of other platforms, but historically like dominated the market, they're moving to Shopify or other platforms more. And the two main reasons would be like TCOs over a 1 to 3 year period, so like the total costs of development and ongoing running of the site. The second one, agility. So by agility, it's delivery of development, but also just like allowing the team to get on with the jobs rather than worrying about maintenance or sites going down or updates to the platforms and all that sort of thing. So what was the second part of the question?
Just it's like, what are the most important features of e-commerce in the context of agility, which I think you covered already, but anything else to add?
Yeah, I think features-wise, I think it's more about the approach and like the freeing up people to do the jobs than features in particular. I don't think it's like a feature that makes people more agile. But one thing I would say, so to demonstrate that is probably a very niche example, but like for example on some other platforms where introducing, say, Klarna would be like a business decision, potentially a massive piece of development work that would take 10 or 20k to actually implement, and then we need to make a business case for that, whereas a Shopify or somebody would be switch it on for 5 minutes effort, actually no development effort, and trial it. So it's things like that are, it's not specific features, but it's like 1,000 paper cuts, I guess, like that just make people more agile.
Sounds good.
Can I add something as well? I think another area is that, like, I think our teams now, or sort of people who actually work with the software, we spend all our day, on phones where iOS or whatever platform you're on is pushing out amazing user experience and so on. And then I think people are demanding the same at work. Like they want best of breed software that's got the latest user experience that's a delight to use. And I suppose in the context of the headless conversation, it suddenly gives the agility for businesses to choose those pieces of software that are going to allow that for their users, which reduces training and onboarding and all this other stuff. So I think that's another.
Yeah, sounds good. Ben, actually, next question is for you. Obviously, no one's a stranger to Shopify in this room. Everyone knows who Shopify is. Everyone has sort of preconceived notions about Shopify as well. And some of those perceptions kind of assume that Shopify used to be this platform where you can spin up a website quickly, and it's a standard website, and when it comes to demanding and non-typical e-commerce flows, Shopify is not a fit. Can you maybe, and some of it was true back in the day when we were starting out in the SMB space, obviously changed over the time. Would you mind just maybe describing the current approach to Shopify architecture?
Yeah, I think that perception is still probably largely there in many cases. I mean, when the premise that you can still spin up a Shopify store in a couple of hours, and the whole concept of a lot out of the box, a lot is really easy to do. We've already talked about every wonderful user experience and what that enables for teams. But the philosophy at Shopify has always been to have technical complexity, pressure release capabilities on every part of the platform. And that has really matured. That's really matured over the last few years. So if you think about front-end options now on Shopify, you can go with the online store, which we've talked about with Liquid and all of the capabilities that has, or you've got the whole headless option where you then have Hydrogen, which is Shopify opinionated remix framework with a lot of pre-built components, ability to launch a headless implementation quite quickly. And I mean, to be honest, Michael, you'll be able to talk a lot more about Hydrogen and all of its capabilities. We call it the hosting Oxygen, which is Shopify's you can host your hydrogen storefront on Shopify with Oxygen. Or using our storefront API, just deploy any headless solution, as it were. And I think that, I suppose the other part actually, sorry, is that the admin API has always been there, right? So you can always, you have for a long time been able to manipulate over 90% or a vast, I don't know what percentage is, a vast proportion of the platform via the API. So things have changed a lot in terms of how much you can slot Shopify in a composable architecture and how you can then interface with it and use it for just certain parts of it, all the way through to businesses who just have it as the one thing that is delivering basically their entire commerce.
Sounds good. I'm going to open up the next question to everyone. Can you share some thoughts on where would you draw the line for going headless with Shopify versus staying on Liquid, staying sort of native Shopify?
I would say I wouldn't. I don't think there is a line actually to go headless or not to go headless. I think we have to understand that right now headless became a same viable solution as going with Liquid. So there's a couple of things to that. So one thing is that the solutions around the headless were created or matured over the time. So I mean, for example, hydrogen, which takes a lot of the complexities out of the headless build. We have to remember we are building the separate application from the scratch. Another thing is that the whole ecosystem matured enough, so all of the integrations, all of the things that were previously rather hard, like analytics, integrating marketing platforms, are already catch up mostly to the headless. So on one side, it's very much easier to start with headless right now. On the other side of things, there is this notion that headless is for a very big particular brands, but I honestly think that headless should always be considered. It could be ruled out very early at the discovery phase, but at least it should be always considered as a viable option to build the storefront. I don't think it's a matter of size. You could be an enterprise brand doing easily 200, 100 mil GMV and do fine on Liquid. That's totally usual situation. However, you could be a typical mid-market brand and use headless with a success. Actually, I really like the quote from one of our clients, Magda Butrim, which is a headless site for almost 3 years now. And the founder said to us that basically when we build the headless solution for them, it's the only place where the Magda Butrim can compete with much larger brands. So the online experience is this place, and it has to be bespoke. So, and we do numerous headless builds at the Commerce UI, and the reasons for going headless weren't always apparent. Like, they weren't obvious. It wasn't, for example, about the size. Like, for example, one client of ours, either apparel, is building their brand based on a community. So a lot of different. So there is this journal that is almost central place to the project. Every PDP, every single PDP, and there is, I know, around 400 SKUs right now, is a unique page. It's not a template page. It's a totally unique page with a very rich storytelling, and they have a very small team. It's only 2 people doing that. So it was actually very important right from the beginning that we optimize the process of content creation. That's what why we go with headless. We incorporated headless CMS. We are able to adjust the process in a very very thoroughly to the client itself. So things like that could be a very viable reason to go with headless.
I like that. I think we're seeing quite a few different scenarios why headless might be a better option than liquid. I really like, I can't remember who said it, but when we were chatting a few days ago, someone said, well, and of course headless isn't for everyone, to which the response was, and of course liquid isn't for everyone, being Shopify's online store deployed, or like a headed approach, which I think is right. And I think the thing that's really great is with the introduction of hydrogen and a whole load of other like pre-integrated CMSs with Shopify, or to be honest, multiple other solutions, the bar of complexity for implementing headless is coming down, and at the same time, the complexity that a liquid storefront can deliver is coming up. And what that's opening up is this amazing optionality for businesses to be able to choose and take actually what's the best for our business overall, because either could be viable, and suddenly you're not boxed into one. Not that that's a terrible thing, but you're not boxed into one route. You have the option, or deploying like in a hybrid scenario, we're bouncing that idea around as well, where you have some pages headless, some pages others. You should also share your car analogy. I love that.
Yeah, I thought you were about to steal it, but yeah, I think my answer before was like, if you, what was it now? I'm going to say it really badly. If you went to a car dealership with like 5 kids into looking for a 7-seater, you wouldn't be asked like, you know, you've got 50k, otherwise look at the 3-seaters, because that's just an irrelevant car. And similarly, you wouldn't go with 50k and then they're showing you the 7-seaters because you're in that price point. That is still the budget. But the gist of it was that I don't think, so you read a lot of articles where it's like, when you get to 25 mil or 50 mil a year, then it's relevant to you. Or sometimes order volume, I've seen in some articles, it's like when your order volume is this much, then it's relevant to you. Like, I think that's, that's not the best way to look at it. I think that's sort of irrelevant. It's more looking at the business requirements, technical requirements. And actually, so I don't agree completely that it should always be considered, because I think there's just a lot of scenarios where it's probably not the right option and that don't need reviewing further. But I would agree that there's no real line of check this box. If you don't check this box, you cross the line to be headless or not be headless. I think there's things like what the team structure is, what the sort of international setup is, content, how much content or the focus on sort of rich content across the site, all that sort of thing should be what the considerations are as to whether it's relevant to look at. I think one of the points you made, which is, I think you said earlier on, which is like Shopify, so part of the success of Shopify is it's like opinionated, with like made technical decisions on how the themes are going to work, how URL structures are going to work. It like didn't fit for everyone, but that's what it was going to be. But that's ended up being they made a lot of the right decisions. That was how like part of the success of Shopify. And I think the interesting thing with hydrogen will be where headless could be a wild west if you've got the wrong agency or the wrong people internally or whatever picking the tech stack. Hydrogen's now like opinionated way of doing headless. So I'll be interested in a year or 18 months time or something to see how that goes.
I also think what you said, Ben, about this hybrid approach is basically a huge thing. It's a generally speaking a business agility in a nutshell. So you have these 2 ways of building the storefronts. One way is for some cases, another is for some. But nowadays you can start with liquid and then gradually, when you're ready, start doing headless, or maybe you can just stick with liquid and just use headless for any particular site. Maybe you have a lot of integrations on a PDP, and or maybe the performance is the key on those PDP pages. That's where you can use the headless and optimize it as well. It can also go the other way around. So maybe the site could be headless for any particular reason, but some site could be liquid based because maybe you would like to use some kind of an integrations from the App Store. So And actually, I also would like to address this, I think, common misconception with the Shopify that if you go headless, you lose the access or you lose the benefit from the app ecosystem, Shopify ecosystem. I think generally that's not true. You do lose access to some of them to the apps that do something, generally speaking, do something to your UI, but you still feel free to use every app that is an integration with any third party, do any or extend any back office logic and so on. And still, the bigger platforms, bigger applications, you can still use even the UI widgets in the headless build. So,
yeah, I think on that I would say that you probably will lose access to 70% of the apps on the App Store in terms of like front-end widgets or something, but most brands that would be considering a headless approach wouldn't be using those 70% of apps. So yeah, like the bigger, more established apps that would tend to be used all have the API functionality to still get most out of it. And actually sometimes for like highly performing brands, you would, even on a liquid build, want to do an API implementation of those apps.
Yeah.
Is it time to throw another thought?
You can put another thought.
I think we see a whole bunch of reasons for why brands start considering headless. Typically, when it's the right decision, it's because of multiple reasons. And I think to throw out some of the reasons we've already talked about, maybe a very brand-led front end. So that's your example of 400 different product templates,
yes.
like that, right? We've seen a lot around speed, which I think you kind of touched on with headless. There's a lot more to break. So the speed thing can be a misleading reason, but I think in some scenarios it definitely is a good use case there. I mean, other things we see in terms of like reasons for it, maybe with the, like Shopify's opinionated approach, as you touched on, there's like there are just hard limitations, which you think actually I need a headless implementation here because that is something I just can't get around, or it's a contributing factor to that overall commercial decision of what front end.
Yeah, I think like the speed one, we actually get. I mean, that's probably a common thing that people are focused on site speed. It's like, should I go headless because I want a faster site? It's like, that's not really, it should be more of like a considered overall approach, not like the answer to a quick fix to that problem. And also you're not guaranteed to, you've got the potential for a site to be faster, it's not guaranteed to be faster than the site built on liquid. So yeah, that's not like my favourite, even though I'm a big advocate of site speed, but that's not my favourite use case. I think common reason, I think like international and content and rich content sort of experience are sort of some of the typical reasons I do think, and like you might disagree, I think having the right internal team structure is like really important, either like with technical people internally in the brand to actually understand the decisions that have been made, or like having really good relationships with the right agencies.
All right. Let's.
Yeah.
All right. That was really good conversation, and I feel like a lot of my follow-up questions were actually answered. Anything else to add in terms of criteria that businesses should consider if they're looking at headless approach? Nothing. I feel like we've covered all of it quite well. So I'm going to move into the last question of the panel. A bit of a left field, but in 2023, it's kind of hard not to talk about AI. Shopify also in that context. So just open question, any thoughts to share, like what you're seeing in that space that's particularly exciting to you?
One of the fun things about working at Shopify is that I get to turn on beta features on some of the test tools that I build for our businesses. And so I've enabled Sidekick, which, if anyone not familiar with the technology, is there's going to be like a little chat sidebar AI assistant in Shopify that will be able to interact with every object within Shopify and also, of course, have access to global economic trends and whatever. So like the future state of that is crazy exciting. But I've been able to have a bit of a play with it, and it's quite fun. Like, it can do bits and bobs already, and the team are building it really fast, so it's moving all the time. But like just being able to, from a natural language perspective, interact with Shopify and say, I want to create a product, and it just goes, okay, well, here we go. I'll start with the product template for you. And you said, I'd like to call it this, and it spun it up. And a silly example, but like you can see already how that's going to change how businesses can work with a platform like Shopify, and how they can interact, and how like what your day-to-day will start looking like when you just tell the AI to go and do a ridiculous amount of heavy lifting on Shopify, and it just does it for you in its natural language. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is actually, data-driven decision process. So I think that no matter the size, every brand at this point is pretty understand well that we should collect all the data that we can. However, I think not a lot of brands are actually analyzing the data or are actually into this data-driven decisions, and that's where the AI, I think, will level the field a lot, even for the smaller brands. And I do believe that Shopify has a really upper hand in this case. Like one thing is that Shopify is all about structured data, being somehow close during the years, and the data is there, the data is structured, and the sheer amount of it, like I don't remember the numbers, but you've mentioned.
Over sort of 2 million businesses on Shopify.
Yeah.
So access into that kind of data pool of structured data.
Yeah. That's the data you can use, you can compare with. So even being able to compare yourself to the competition is a big win.
Yeah, I think currently some of the AI. So I'm very excited about what some of the AI functionality could be. I think some of the current implementations are probably like not novelty, but early stage, and probably not going to be used by brands that are looking at headless or that sort of thing right now, but you can see that there will be in future. I think the one that you just mentioned where it's like pulling trends and pulling like insights out of big, batches of data that from a human level would take a long amount of time is where I've been most interested. So we run an app, shameless plug, called Census, where we collect a lot of queries, so it's post-purchase surveys after an order. So we have brands where they get like 100,000 survey responses a month. And actually it's like amazing data, but nobody can sit and read through them all. So we now output, crunch all that data, output the key insights and improvements that can be made based on all the feedback that we've had. And I think that on a bigger scale as well than what we're using is probably where my main interest would be.
I think the Census app is really cool. And actually,
So do I.
all right.
Talk to Liam about the Census app after the panel. Thank you. Thank you.
Carry on? Do we carry on?
Yeah, no, I think.
Okay. About census? No?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Time's over.
Anything else to add before we wrap up the panel? No, I think we're good. All right. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Michael. Let's continue the conversation over more drinks. There's some drinks in the front. There's some drinks in the back. There's food in the back as well. So just start helping yourself. And yeah, let's continue the conversation. Cheers. Thank you.